Welcome to our viewers. Thanks for joining us on our webinar today, The Beginning of the End of Ransomware, with Veeam, VMware, and Cloudian. I'm Chris Evans from Architecting IT, and I'm an independent technology analyst, subject matter expert on storage and virtualization. I'm also a writer and a blogger. Joining us today are Michael Cade, Senior Global Technologist from Veeam Software, Guy Bartram, Global Product Marketing at VMware, and Neil Stobart, VP of Global Systems Engineering at Cloudian. So welcome, Michael, Guy, and Neil. So I want to start by talking about what ransomware actually is. So perhaps, Guy, you could start by just giving us a definition of what you think ransomware is, and whether the definition we have on the screen there is a good, accurate representation of what we see in the industry.
Absolutely. So ransomware is, well, the name kind of gives it away. It's a type of malware, and primarily is a malware that will prevent you from accessing your system once you're infected, usually via encryption of some files, and typically will result in demanding some sort of payment, typically via a system like Bitcoin, somewhere where the end recipient is not known to the sender. And it's a pervasive technology that is out there in the internet. It's typically spread through emails, through phishing, through a bunch of social engineering techniques as well. It's particularly nasty in that it can be used for not just generic taking systems down, but it can be used to actually target companies and target operations where things like our National Health Service, for example, have been breached in the past, and this is critical things for our government and for our country to run. So it's not only things that affect just companies, but it can also affect organizations like public organizations as well.
Okay, great. So Michael, could you just touch there on a little bit? We're going to come on to this in a bit more detail later, but can you just touch briefly on how people do get infected with ransomware, and we'll set the scene about understanding how that happens.
Yeah, I think the way in which ransomware is infiltrating these environments has massively grown up. Ransomware is not new in terms of, it's not a new thing over the last couple of years. It's just been more topical because of the nature of how they're holding companies for ransom. I mean, malware has been around for a very long time. We've probably seen the slides of where it shows this exponential growth of people attacking systems, and really the guys that are delivering this are getting smarter and smarter on how they actually deliver this, let's call it a package, into the environment, whether it's through NAS-based technology, whether it's through application, and we're seeing advanced ways in which they're infiltrating the actual environment and the data that you have within your environment.
And we moved on to a second slide here where we look at some of the quotes we see in the press and various different reports that are out there. I'm very interested, Neil, to understand this idea of cyber attacks classed as being the 5th top most likely global risk, which seems particularly high, but maybe it isn't. Maybe it's realistic. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting that it's put up there with other subjects such as pandemics and global climate change. The fact that ransomware is considered as it's risk as big as those type of activities, and certainly as we see at the moment with the COVID-19 pandemic, the fact that that they are rating it as risky and dangerous is that. So there is a risk, huge risk, for every individual, for every organization concerned that's holding digital data. That ransomware, if they get impacted by it, it will take their data, or they are open to extortion, essentially. So the problem in the digital era is that the attackers could literally be anywhere in the world, under any sort of, jurisdiction where they. So I don't know, if you get attacked in the UK, how do you then, investigate and arrest somebody that's maybe in, I don't know, somewhere like Russia, US, anywhere in Asia, it's incredibly difficult. So I think that's the challenge, that it is all pervasive, and if that impacts or potentially could impact anybody in the world using digital data, digital systems, and where do you go for recourse? I think on the slide there it shows that 51% of US organizations actually opted to pay that ransom, because otherwise, how do you get your local police force investigating and chasing down this invisible agent that you're going to, it's going to be incredibly difficult to find. So I think almost paying the ransom is almost the only option. But then, of course, as we also see, 22% never got access to their data. So there's no guarantee paying the ransom will get your data back. And in fact, I think any police organization would be advising, don't pay the ransom. Whether it's a kidnapping or a theft of some sort, this is exactly the same situation. So, I think it is right up there.
So, Guy, I just want to come back to you a second and just touch on the impact across the industry. I think we might be sitting here thinking this is only affecting commercial businesses, that it might be very focused on the sort of companies that are likely to pay up, but actually this can affect the social aspect of frameworks of things like hospitals, healthcare, governments. It's not literally just the commercial sector that's affected.
No, I mean that you typically will hear more about the larger commercial organizations, and quite often, unfortunately, you don't hear about them until 6 months after, or some time after they've tried to deal with it. And that's obviously because bad press is bad press. Lots of people would not be happy to know that companies aren't taking measures to protect their personal identity or anything to do with their data. Yeah. And I think now we've got standards like GDPR and stuff like that, which are making it even more important for companies to protect personal information, personal data. But it's not just a large enterprise getting here. It's everyone. Lots of times phishing emails are sent out generically to massive distribution lists that are purchased online. And you can go to various websites now and look up your personal email addresses and find out if they're used in any of these attacks and if they've been targeted in any of these attacks. Our recommendation is if you do find something like that, then you change it immediately and start using a different email address, or be very careful about what emails you open. But it also affects, I think it was mentioned, sort of financial organizations are, a key target. But any businesses really who operate in general, from small to medium businesses to large global enterprises to governments, hospitals, even charities, they're all subject to it. And it's, to some extent, the less capability you have to prepare yourself from ransomware, the more likely you're going to get actually breached. Thinking about the type of cost that's involved in protecting yourself is often a deterrent from doing it. It's like having an insurance policy. So unfortunately, smaller organizations tend to think this is something that, one, may not happen to them, two, they couldn't afford to protect themselves even if it was going to happen to them, and they don't do it. And there's some of the stats here. 34% of businesses took a week or more to regain access to data. I think there's other stats around within 6 months, most businesses actually shut because they never recover from a data loss, particularly if they've paid the ransom and then haven't got back access to their data. That's a huge chunk of their capital perhaps that's sitting there, which could pay to get the business back up and running. And of course, that's then gone. So it's pervasive everywhere. And I think also the interesting point about ransomware is it can be targeted. Now, when you're targeted, as this kind of slide starts saying, when you're targeted, it becomes very, very dangerous indeed.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris. I was just going to add to the fact that it is being rated as such a high risk is the potential that it actually impacts key services, and as we're finding at the moment, key services are obviously the NHS in the UK, health organisations, but retail outlet, supermarkets, the delivery drivers, all these organisations are now absolutely critical infrastructure components for us. If any of those organisations were to have their data encrypted, where they couldn't actually use it, then that would have serious consequences to where we are, right now. But in every day as well. So all of a sudden we couldn't get those services like food deliveries or, the actual operation of the hospitals, or even, something more simple as, collecting your rubbish bins in the morning. If you can't, those services can't be delivered. I don't want to use the word anarchy, but it's a significant impact. It's not just about data. We're talking about the livelihoods and the way that a country goes about doing their day-to-day business.
Yeah, I mean, there's some examples here. So we look at this, and it talks about the NHS, which obviously definitely had an impact in how the NHS operated for a certain length of time. Travelex were, I think, going back to paper and using all sorts of other methods to try and service people, but they had businesses that were connected to the web and various other companies that they supported, so that became a big issue for them. So it's pretty clear when you look at some of the numbers here, we're talking millions, and we're talking big impact to how this happens. Would you agree?
Absolutely, and I don't think we've had something that's been, I think the attacks on the NHS are the most concerning. And I also think, local government, certainly in the UK, where there's, over the last 10 years, there's been a serious lack of investment in those areas. I don't want to get political here, but compared to organisations where they measure everything through financial loss, the investment will, the cost-benefit analysis will lead to action being taken. In local government and the NHS, where funds are, not more readily available, they have to focus on spending their money on life-saving equipment rather than having the most up-to-date IT and security. So.
You mentioned a good thing, Neil.
I'm not trying to sort of do those IT organisations down, but at the end of the day, it does come down to money investment and the expertise of understanding where to put that investment that gives you your most bang for your buck.
Yeah, you were going to say. You're going to add to that.
Sorry, I think you mentioned a good point there, and I think one of the things we've seen recently is supply and demand, and we've seen a big disruption to supply chain. And you think about supply chain coming from, production, maybe that's offshore, India, China, shipping, understanding the demand for the assets, the time lag for assets to get to you, the distribution once they get to you, the logistics companies, and all of those systems are, they're not one company solution typically. They're, outsourced to many, many different vendors. And in that situation, you kind of think if there's a disruption in supply chain, it has serious implications, not just on your company, but on many different things. And we've particularly seen this recently. I think, when you look at ransomware and you look at the supplying organizations, because these things are known threats, in my mind, there is a need to drive there is no excuse for not protecting yourself. It's the consequences are serious. People who rely on in your business to get paid, to have a mortgage, to have families, will lose their jobs. Hackers will just get more pervasive and more intelligent on the back of getting paid and make money out of your company. And there are things that can be done about this. And it's something that is, as you can see on the map, it's going on all the time. I think this is a great kind of lead into this picture.
Absolutely. I just wanted to bring Michael in and just ask the question here, whether you think that ransomware infection is inevitable, and therefore, based on what Guy just said about protection and everything you need to do, that we should plan for the fact that we're going to be infected, whether we do our best or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, generally speaking, in IT, we think about, it's not going to be us. Even in our daily life, it's not going to affect us. It's not going to get us. We're not going to get hacked. We're not going to have this downtime. We're not going to. And I think that's clearly the wrong way of thinking. We are absolutely all at risk of having this ransomware attack or a ransomware attack infiltrate our data. especially, and I know we're going to get onto where we store that data, like where we run those workloads and all of that thing. We have to be mindful of that. Now, from a preventative point of view, we just have to be more mindful of, we can put all of the stops in place to prevent that from a security point of view. But as I said, they're evolving as well. These people that are writing these, or these groups that are writing these ways in which they encrypt your data, they're making smarter ways to infiltrate the data center or wherever that data resides. So the security, yeah. Right. So yeah, I think it's absolutely inevitable.
Okay. I think I'd like to move us on then, and you're right. This diagram was a great description of exactly, where we see things coming from. I think I managed to even click on part of it there to actually bring up the detail about Turkey, which I don't think was really the intention. But never mind. Let me just close that off. There we go. And we move on to the next slide. So I really just want to go on and talk about the idea now of exactly how we're changing our business in order to use new technologies, use the cloud, and how this changes the way that we look at how we do we protect ourselves, and how that sort of exposes us within I guess our IT environments. So, Guy, I wonder if you could just take the lead on this one, and we'll go through what these reports are actually showing. So, on the left-hand side there, we've got Enterprise Cloud Strategy, a report from the State of the Cloud.
Chris, you need to move the slide forward.
Yeah,
report.
Jump ahead.
Okay, I can still see that slide, so maybe it's my machine. 1 second. So
there you go.
There you go.
Yeah, I think it's when we've got that graphic up, it corrupts the stream slightly. Sorry, I apologize for that. So as I was just saying, we have two graphs on this particular slide. So we've got one that shows the rise of hybrid cloud, but then within that we've got one that shows all of the challenges that sit within that. So Guy, can you take us sort of through this and some of the challenges we can see here that potentially are going to expose us a bit more towards ransomware and that we have to consider?
Yeah, sure, Chris. So if I think from the last 10 years of cloud usage, from the days when lines of business, and it still happens occasionally today, are looking to get instant resources that IT can't provide in the data center due to the governance that they have within the data center, which has grown very much out of very heavy processes and adherence to things like ITIL standards. So most organizations have grown and proliferated across, I think the stat is between 5 and 20 different cloud environments. So if you think about that, your data gravity is spread across 5 to 20 different providers. And this really means that you've got different security, different networking, different operational capability, different levers to do X and Y functionality in every single one of those cloud environments. And the challenge of that is you have a disparate and non-jointed security model. It's impossible to enforce the same restrictions and control over every single cloud, because some clouds just don't support those things, or they support it slightly differently. So you have to learn how this works and operate it. And this is where a lot of the problems have emerged with utilizing outsourced cloud technologies. We know now that customers want to use cloud. It's convenient. It's often, getting large CapEx investments for their data centers is often very difficult. Using an OpEx model, moving to cloud, providing the agility and some of the non-tangibles cloud can bring is compelling for a lot of enterprises and small to medium businesses. And indeed, we use Office 365 just like everyone else. So all of the back office is pretty much already in cloud. So hybrid cloud is not something that's a state that we want to get to. Hybrid cloud, the need for hybrid cloud is here and now, i.e., most companies have between 5 and 20 clouds, but they want one hybrid cloud operational model across the whole lot to ensure security and standards that are adhered to. And the interesting play here around the cloud challenges is this is around customers who are small to medium business to large businesses, around the challenges they're seeing in utilizing those clouds. So governments being the number one, somewhat of a challenge, and lack of resources being the number one significant challenge. And And that's significant because when you look at the different clouds, the different skills that are required, you need resources in those cloud technologies. Like I said, everything is going to be different within each cloud, and the implementation is going to need to be done using different capabilities which require different skills. But then you need governance. You need a governance model that works across all these clouds. Having a governance model for each cloud is incredibly difficult to manage, especially when each cloud is bringing out sort of 400 to 500 products a year. A lot of those may be security products. A lot of those may be products your company adopts for applications or platforms or whatever. And hence, things like cloud spend also get out of control. And this is, when you look at where you've got to spend your money, security is probably the most important thing. If you're running your stuff in what is fundamentally someone else's computing stack, security is key. So you want to have the same level of security you had in your data center, the same level of operations that you had in your data center over that different computing, someone else's computing stack. And security is a key challenge there. Significant challenge for a lot of people. Second highest is significant challenge, and obviously somewhat of a challenge to the rest. So all of these challenges represent areas where customers are clipping corners. Every time you clip corners, you are exposing yourself more. The more clouds you have, the more attack surface area potential you have. The more different types of cloud stacks you have, the more you have to manage, the more it's going to be complex to do. And really, this is a compounded problem across the board.
Okay, so let's bring Michael in on this then, because from your perspective as a company that's protecting data that can sit in private cloud, in public cloud, some of the things that Guy's talking about there, you must see every day, Michael, in the way that you look at perhaps whether people are aware of things like protecting SaaS platforms like Office 365. The vendors aren't going to do that on your behalf. So, what are you experiencing when you're out there in the field?
So generally, like exactly what Guy said, is people are focusing on the workload. How can we make things faster, more efficient, like reducing risk and all of that good stuff? Whereas, so then from a data management point of view, is how do we protect that data regardless of where it is? And we're in a world now as well where it's quite easy to move data from on-premises into the cloud, maybe back again, maybe like those burstable workloads type scenarios that arise throughout the year. So we're focusing on that data and how we're protecting that data so that if there are a ransomware attack or any other outage or some sort of failure scenario, we've got the ability to protect them. But they're not all the same either. Like the public clouds are all different. And as Guy said as well, there's hundreds of new services coming out every month from them guys. So it's about understanding where that data lives, how do we protect it, but also more importantly, how do we recover that data and where do we recover that to? That's a big thing that from a data management point of view, they're the new challenges of backup or data management that we have today.
So Neil, I mean, as a company that's got the word cloud in your name, clearly this must be a concern for you as a company, especially around things like the compliance side of things and how people manage data across multiple locations, multiple environments. There's a whole host of issues around business continuity and DR that we really need to think about.
Well, I mean, cloud just made shadow IT a hell of a lot harder to deal with. We going back 25 years, I think when I started in IT, I was in an IT organization for a bank. You had, departments running off and building their own solutions that we weren't offering as centralized IT. Then we would find out about it as soon as they had a problem that they couldn't solve. It was easy enough to stand up that solution, harder to support it. Now, you can literally get your credit card out and take these services. And a lot of organizations obviously now brought in a strategy to kind of bring that under control. But it's new operating systems, new applications, new everything, new ways of storing data, especially in the cloud with kind of that object storage type style. In Cloudian, we kind of try and help bridge the gap of putting your data under one umbrella of control, whether it's in any of the big public cloud or private cloud areas. But even that is you know, it's difficult, because if you have got services bouncing around, you know, on premise, you know, in cloud, something in between, where is that data going? Is the data going with it? Is it staying in one place? I mean, having a strategy of trying to keep your data in one place is all well and good, but you know, often now, you know, the application needs to be, you know, close to the data. We spent a lot of time in the past, I think, you know, trying to take the data to the application, but because data sets are so large these days, you know, there's this huge trend towards bringing the application towards the data. And, you know, the marketing guys talk about that sort of data gravity, you know, the data sort of pulling in the applications. And I think we'll see a lot more of that. And I actually think that's a desirable state, because you want to know where your data is, you know, and you want to set up all of the periphery services around it about protection, you know, whether it's disaster recovery, data corruption, accidental data deletion, or something like, you know, ransomware. It kind of all falls into the same bucket. You need to safeguard that data. You can rebuild an application. You can't rebuild your data, you know, very easily. So I think that's something that everyone needs to sort of start to think about, is regardless of what services you're using, you know, just for goodness sake, think about, you know, keeping your data in one place that you can build all that stuff around, and then bring the application towards the data. I honestly think that's kind of the way to go for some of those larger data sets, larger applications, and larger organizations.
Okay. Now, whilst I see that makes complete sense, there's a bit of a challenge there that I think we're moving to a different style of work, Guy, in the sense that we have to support what developers want going forward. And developers are very specific about wanting to build out their environments in public cloud. You know, they want it fast, they want it quick, they don't want to hang around. And you're almost having to sort of balance the risk side of it against not actually hindering your business. So, you know, what's your view on how we manage the way that developers work in this sort of challenge, especially, you know, with ransomware?
Yeah, so I mean, Veeam has been very focused on supporting customers through the challenge of managing multi-cloud with a hybrid cloud model. And what's happening now is that, as Neil was saying, there's lots of different capabilities in these clouds. And cloud is very much a very simple place where you can bring up an application very quickly. You can extend the application, you can develop the application. You don't even need to know anything about code if you're going to use some of the sort of drag and drop type application constructs you can create. So for those who do code, you know, there is obviously public repositories like GitHub and stuff like that where you can download, use ready code bases to utilize in your code. And whenever you're looking at these kind of applications which manipulate data, you've got to be really sure that you're allowing the correct levels of responsibility and access for those applications to the data. And what VMware has been very focused on recently is providing what we call intrinsic security into the application, where we're building it with the application being secure, not thinking about securing the application after it is deployed. And I think developers now are getting much more choice in which cloud they're going to run in, because they're building the applications with the particular hooks, which are, you could define it as lock-in, but developer would define it as functionality that, Mr. Customer, you need. So, you know, you're gonna buy this, you're gonna run it here, and we're gonna develop the application to utilize these hooks. And really, you know, you're gonna see a lot more of this application transformation messaging and reality coming as people are looking at their legacy applications, deciding what to do with them. Moving them to cloud is not always the best thing. Some things just don't move. So they have to rebuild, redesign for cloud. And that will allow them to build in perhaps new functionality like transport logistics, IOT solutions, and things like that. For them to utilize this, they need to work with a platform vendor who's invested in these new technologies. Take someone like Azure, for example, with their third generation ICT environment they've got. You can then bring in machine learning and all this other stuff into your application, which sounds great. But again, you're exposing yourself by utilizing public code repositories. You're exposing yourself by not securing your application from the start and making sure your application is intrinsically secure.
Well, let's move on then, and let's talk about exactly how we see an attack take place. Now, this is a pretty busy diagram. I apologize for the choice of colors and the number of boxes that are on it, but it's trying to show effectively the challenge that you have if you're going to get infected. Now, Michael, I wonder if you can start us off here just by talking about some of the challenges we're seeing on the left-hand side of this diagram in terms of how people are likely to have accidentally or deliberately or got an infection in their environment.
Yeah, and I think the attack or the attack method over there in the red are the ones that we know about today, and we fully expect that that's going to increase, and there's going to be different attack methods to get those attachments, those URLs, etc., all into your environment. And there's around the GDPR, Guy mentioned this at the start, which obviously instills that you need to act upon any ransomware attacks. There's a lawyer that mentioned this around the left and the right of the bang. If you think about the bang being that victim infected, so ransomware has infiltrated your environment, it's then sat there maybe stagnant for weeks, months, maybe even years. And if we think about that red line going down the middle of the slide as the bang, the left is where we have the capability of being able to have some sort of prevention, and whether that's education to stop your workforce who are not in your IT department, just have a little bit more education about understanding what not to click on, what not to use, what not to open, how to create better passwords and put policies around that. And then obviously from the IT point of view, how do they prevent and how do they make things more secure and lock the doors using firewalls and other ways of being able to prevent that. But as we said also before, is that it's kind of inevitable that something potentially will come through and it will cause that bang. And this is the important part, is how quick can we get that remediation task to happen? And this is where the things, making sure that the data management is in place and making sure that you've got the angles and the process in place to make sure that you can get that data recovered as fast as possible back into a clean environment. Because there's no point if that ransomware attack has been sat in your environment for the last 3 to 6 months, and it's sat there and it's been slowly creeping around those old files that have never been accessed, and it's encrypted them. No one knows that that's happened. We could easily recover back to a backup that we had from yesterday, but that's not going to help remediate that problem. You need to be able to work with your security teams, with everything that you've got within your IT environment, but also your whole business, to be able to understand and remediate the threat first before you then go to that point of restore that backup file that you have. And I think that hopefully summarizes what that flow looks like in the slide.
Great. I mean, I'd like to go in a bit more detail and maybe ask Neil to talk around this. And I hate to sort of reference the fact that we're in the coronavirus period when it's pretty obvious that we're all in separate places. We're all still social distancing to make sure that we reduce the impact of the virus. But when you look at some of the things that are here, some of the social engineering, the phishing emails, and there's a lot of commonality between the way that a virus spreads in human populations, for sake of argument, and the sort of techniques that people are using to try and get you infected. There's lots of different exploits, and they're not all technical. There's a lot of other social ones, and there's a lot of other challenges that you really have to be careful on.
I guess it's no surprise that they call it, virus. The parallels with what we're seeing at the moment with the COVID-19 pandemic is kind of crazy, really. Look at the methodologies we're trying to, like you said, reduce that social contact. That's very much trying to stop the delivery of the virus, right? And I think that is very. It's an analogy, on that sort of that delivery left-hand side of the Big Bang there. But what is the remedy? What are we doing with COVID-19? We're trying to firewall off people, or the most vulnerable people. And of course, you've got that in your network as well. You've got your applications that are not, they're open to the internet. You've got your DMZ, you've got your air-gapped platforms as well. And I mean, that's what we're trying to do in the real world right now, is air-gap to the vulnerable people. And what's the long term? I mean, or what would have helped, to avoid us, suffering from this? Well, it's vaccination, isn't it? It's immunization on a global scale, which is, incredibly difficult right now. But, in the IT world, for me, that's about bringing in, we're going to talk about object lock. It's worm type technology. That for me is the vaccine for us right now. But it's, as Michael said, as that infection starts to spread, what are the steps that you should be following? If you've got something in place that's going to prevent, or not necessarily prevent, I don't think you can prevent the infection, but it's having the vaccination where you won't be impacted as much. And, we talk about backups, we'll talk about snapshots, we'll talk about, having worm storage. But before, if you have all of that in place and it is going to protect you, then you can't get the disease. You're going to recover from that a lot quicker.
Can I just ask you a quick question there, though? And anybody can answer this one. It's just an observation, and that's when we see something like a novel coronavirus come out. It's something that the population's never seen before and has no prevention for it. Now, we know that we suddenly find exploits that come around in technology that we've never seen before or didn't even know exist. So in some respects, there's an expectation that there will be exploits that we weren't even aware of that could cause us to be infected in our environment. So it's back to that inevitable scenario. Does anybody want to sort of talk us through what that means?
I think when you look at the impact of if you look at the totality of I guess security, and look at it like an onion, right? You've got right on the edge, you've got your social, physical aspects of security, which are, you can do some enablement and teach your staff not to open emails, stuff like that. But inevitably, we're humans and we all make mistakes. Somehow, something is going to get in. And like you say, it may be something that's new that no one's seen before. It may be something that, hopefully you've got some protection for in your application base today. Most likely not, if it's very, very new. So the distribution piece is where you've then got to lock down, and you've got to basically isolate, contain, and treat. And what you'll find is even with these new exploits, they often have a signature. When WannaCry came out, it took everyone about a week, I think, to work out what it was, how it was doing it, where it was doing it, and what to look out for. And from that point on, it was fairly easy to kind of understand how WannaCry spread, for example, open RDP ports on Windows servers. Very simple to then lock down RDP ports. But if you've got a secure state as a baseline, and I think lots of people, particularly cloud providers, are providing that enablement to smaller companies who can't afford or can't deliver the security themselves. Cloud providers delivering secure clouds as a default have clouds that are understanding and learning in terms of their firewalling aspects and bringing that security perimeter from the kind of edge gateway kind of base security, old castle and moat job, into every VM being its own castle and moat. So every VM has a firewall, and it doesn't matter where you put that VM in someone else's cloud, as long as it's a vSphere cloud running NSX, it will still maintain the firewall and the secure posture that your security information officers want to kind of maintain. So to answer your question, as these viruses come or these malwares are distributed, we get to know about them. The first couple of cases, hopefully we can contain them. But what you look for is a behavior. You look for an unusual behavior. When you start seeing a sudden spike in RDP on your network, your net flow should pick that up. your traffic analyzer should go, whoa, what's this? This is not normal behavior. And the default for normal behavior is not normal behavior is to disallow. That's the way you isolate and contain before everything is gone.
Yeah, so we're starting to get into this slide, I think, and some of the discussions here around things like zero trust networking, detection tools, and so on. You started off in some of that discussion there, Guy, but there's a whole lot here that we really can talk about in terms of other technologies and tools. Can you give us a bit more of an idea of some of the technologies that you've got within VMware and the sort of things that people should be using?
Sure. So zero trust networking is probably the NSX marketing tagline, where we take a point of view about networking that is, one, it's all software defined, so it's very quick to deliver updates to rather than legacy networking. Two, it's hybrid. It's a hybrid networking model. So your security posture doesn't change if you move a VM from one data center to another. It stays the same. In terms of detection tools, things like vRealize Network Insight will give you real visibility, instant visibility into your traffic flow within your virtualized infrastructure, which is very interesting because when you consider what people think is their mission critical infrastructure, you talk about continuity planning, and we talk about what VMs we need on a really sub 10-second RPO because they're really super important VMs, mission critical. Then we got our business critical VMs. This is the subset, and sometimes you'll get given by the customer. Back in my consultancy days, certainly, these are the VMs that we think are mission critical, and these are the VMs that are business critical, and these are the non-critical. And you plug in something like a flow analyzer, like vRealize Network Insight, and suddenly you see all the traffic going between these VMs. And some of that traffic may be unexpected, indicating that there are feeds to these mission critical VMs that the customer didn't even know about. And that's where you start to build a picture about what's important in that customer's account. If you take that snapshot, this is business as normal. If I then go and change this, then I'm going to interrupt business. And so when you're talking about continuity planning and things like that, these type of kind of analysis, assessment tools should be front and center for any services that you're looking to purchase from a cloud provider, because they're going to help you understand more about your estate, number one. And as you go through, then obviously from a platform play, from our perspective, we have Cloud Director, which is our service provider solution for providing multi-tenanted clouds. Things like pay-go, public cloud to dedicated cloud infrastructures as well. So pretty much every option a customer could want, they can run in a secure environment with self-service. The CISOs get security information officers get access to see their security posture. They get access to change their distributed firewalling for each VM to ensure their policies are being adhered to. And obviously then we work with Cloudian from a S3 object storage plugin, so customers create their own buckets of S3 object storage, and Veeam from backup and restore services directly within Cloud Director. So it's a unified experience for the consumer and very much easier for the cloud service provider to deliver on a single platform.
Okay, so let's just sort of group that a little bit, and we talk about there to a certain degree prevention and detection. There's a lot around best practices and things like restricting privileged accounts, getting people to keep their software up to date, and actually being aware. But at some point, you're going to have to rely on something that gets you back when something goes wrong. So regular backups comes out as a big piece here. And from your perspective, Michael, if you could talk us through the bottom of this slide and just talk about what we mean by establishing the right policies for the right data, things like the 3-2-1 rule, and then we can get to Neil and talk about some of the challenges around immutability after that.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing there under that backup, and this doesn't matter if you're using Veeam or not, right? If this methodology is used, then you're going to have an offsite copy of your data in a secure location. So what we mean by the 3-2-1 rule is 3 copies of your data on 2 different media types, and one of them being offsite. And we'll get into what that offsite means and what options you have with that. But basically, that one offsite is that out-of-band copy of your data. It's not accessible through any protocols within your environment. It's off. It could be tape. It could be off to object storage in a different location. It could be leveraging our service providers who are offering backup as a service. It's completely out of band, and you, even as the backup admin, generally will not have access to that online copy of data or offline copy of that data. So then the policies, and this kind of goes back to what Guy was talking about, the mission critical, the business critical, the gold, silver, bronze type approach is, well, let's understand what that business or what that data requirement is and where they need to fit. And generally the first conversation that you have with any customer, well, it's all important. We need it all back as fast as possible. And that's fine. It's just going to, obviously there's an implication of some sorts that comes with that, whether it's cost or whether it's speed, or there's something that you have to adhere to. And then it's, well, how do we use the platform? So how do we use vSphere to help us drive that protection from a backup perspective? How do we make it as least impactful as possible on the actual production environment? How do we leverage the storage snapshots? We integrate with lots of the storage vendors out there, leveraging their storage snapshots, which again are potentially out of band copies of data that are inaccessible via anything on the network, and they're out of band at that point. And that could be another recovery point that you could use to get out of jail, or at least get out of this infection. And then it's about, where do we store that data? So where does that offsite copy, or where does that third copy of that data end up? And that's where we get into this lock, or this capability of being able to lock that data down. Now, tape is an absolute option there. Management of vast amounts of tape, warehouses of tape, gets very difficult to manage. But then we've seen, especially from an S3 or an AWS S3 point of view, things like Object Lock as an API being developed, and something that Cloudian have done from an on-premises object storage point of view is integrate with Object Lock as an API, which then provides immutability that we can also leverage from within Veeam. So if we think about this as we can turn on immutability from a Veeam point of view, but also from a Cloudian point of view, that means that even the backup admin has no capability of being able to edit or change or modify that data that we're pushing into that object storage for a period of retention. Then a very important thing is, that's all well and good. The backup, the lock-in, that's the easy bit really. But how do we ensure that that backup is in a good state before it goes off into that backed up state, so that we never have to use this, but we need to know that that backup is in a good place, that we can restore that. And we have features within Veeam that allow us to verify the recoverability of that data, whether that be from one of our backups, from the storage snapshot, or even from a replica that we're sending over to a different location. We want to be able to automate that process of saying, yes, the VM is good, yes, the application is good, the OS is good, and send an automated report, not only to satisfy the auditors so that you're running tests on that business continuity plan, but also to give you peace of mind. As a backup admin, as a data admin, you need to know that that data is in a good place, and being able to test that on a daily basis, weekly basis, and confirm that that data is good before it goes and lays to wherever that needs to be from a long-term retention. Then that's a nice package of that. But then also when we come to recover, so we've said about all of these new ways in which the ransomware is attacking our systems. They're potentially in our data today, but we have no idea about them. Let's put it that way. The security guys, they don't know that potential strains are out there. And what if we've got a backup there that's sat there for a month, and let's say we're going to restore some data from that it potentially is infected with an infection that was put there just before the backup was taken, that backup is still compromised at that point because it's still sat there in a stagnant state. So what we've also got within Veeam is the ability to run or integrate into antivirus software out of the box that allows us to ensure that when we're recovering that data, we can actually scan it on the way through in an isolated environment to make sure that there is no threats within that. So that gives you peace of mind to test that against the up-to-date definitions from the antivirus software. But yeah, it really allows us not to push back or introduce as part of that recovery any malware threats again.
Perfect. I just want to go back to, I talked to Neil about the object lock and the immutability side, because I think there's a very subtle difference between the idea of object lock and immutability when we look at things like air gapping, Neil. And I think people need to really understand the difference, because clearly tape is one type of technology that would give you an air gap. An air gap isn't necessarily immutability, is it?
No, because at some point you're going to have to bring your tape back past the air gap. So I mean, immutability really is the fact that you can't change something, and it's often called worm, write once, read many. It's been around for quite a while, at least sort of 15 odd years, if not longer. And I think it's a technology that was primarily used in certain industry verticals. Finance, health, the two that springs to mind immediately. And really it's about ensuring that your data is tamper-proof, essentially. So that, if you go to a court of law, you can prove that this digital data object I have, might be an email, it might be a Word document, has not been tampered with, has not been modified, and it can be used in a court of law as evidence. So very similar to, let's say your paper copy of your document or a photograph, if you're thinking about imaging from a healthcare. That's really where that technology is being used. So it's putting in not only the technology but the process within your organization, because it's not just, the technology can protect and store the data as immutable, as tamper-proof. But if you don't have the right process, a rogue admin or an accidental admin could come along and delete the data because they have privileges, access privileges way beyond everybody else. So there's a whole process, and I think certainly with the one that we look at a lot is the Sarbanes-Oxley Sec 17A ruling. You have to have a third party come and validate that your technology can be, fit for purpose when you deploy it in a controlled process. So when you look at something like tape, it is air gapped, it's offline. You need to sort of take that physical media, you need to put it into the system, you need to recall the data. As Michael already said, that data might have already been compromised at some point. But when you look at the things like the test and assurance, that really is very critical to making sure you've got good recovery points. Tape is not the best technology, because you have to have manual intervention, and if you've got a large environment, I mean, how many tapes are we talking about? For some it's thousands, tens of thousands.
Absolutely.
I've come across hundreds of thousands with some organizations.
Me too. Yeah. And
tape is not a good technology or storage technology for long-term archival. They think a shelf life of a tape 7 years, and that's if you look after it, if you bring it off the shelf and you're indexing the data and winding the tape, bit rot hasn't set in. Something like object storage, which is a disk-based system, which is obviously what Cloudian operate in. That data is always online, it's always available to support the test and assurance. I mean, the other nice thing is object storage can almost automatically give you your off-site copy. Now, the object lock is essentially it's just a feature we have in our system, same as when AWS pioneered this, the S3 API, but it is just another enhancement to the API where you can decide to lock or not to lock, a certain set of data. And it goes back to, not all data is created equal. Do you really want to put object lock on everything? Maybe not. I mean, it's the point of it is if, the ransomware is coming in and attacking file systems, it's attacking files. Any regular file system, if a hacker gets access to it and then they encrypt it, that means that nobody can get access to that set of files or file system without the encryption key. Essentially, what object lock is doing is it's saying nothing can modify, this data. So if the ransomware hits, yes, it will go and take out all of the production data that's been exposed to the attack. But with the object lock, it's basically saying, yeah, okay, you can change it, but we're going to keep this old version. So no matter encryption can be applied, and we can actually go back to a previous version. But actually, what object lock extends that even further to say you cannot change this. This data cannot be changed, whether it's legitimate or illegitimate. So it just gives you that assurance that it cannot be changed. Now, of course, that then puts on another challenge in the fact that typically with worm storage, you are giving it a retention period. You wouldn't say this needs to be locked for 10 years, 20 years. This is where some of the compliance with regulations in those certain industries comes into play. You need to go back 10 years for your financial results. So that once that data is locked, it's there. And unless you actually throw the machinery away, that data is going to be there. So there's a challenge that you've got to ensure that you don't lock your data for too long, or else, your storage costs are going to spiral, which is why I said, it might not be the right solution for everything. Because if all of a sudden you've locked your old data and you're just piling on more and more data all of the time and you can't delete that old data, that then becomes something very difficult to manage. But essentially, immutability is that you cannot change your data.
So, they always say that the backup administrator is the person who's got the most power in any organization, because not only can they restore anything over the top of anything, they can delete everything as well. So what we're very specifically saying here is that this technology stops even the backup administrator from doing anything. Everybody is locked out. It's not just guys with special privileges that can come along and do stuff. It's everybody, isn't it? So, it's completely locked out.
It is. So some of the processes I've heard is that to actually, there's always like a super admin to go and administrate a system like this.
Yeah.
But we recommend, the password goes in a lock safe, and the only way that you get access to that lock safe, I don't know, permission by the CEO, something like that, and that then you can go and try and do something, but that is so ring fenced at that point that. And that's what I mean by bringing the technology in as part of a sort of an overall process as well. But the backup guys, they get to see all the data, they potentially control all the data. And what is interesting is, and I think Michael, you might be able to talk about this a bit better, but we've seen hackers targeting backup data before the production data because it's kind of invisible, right?
Well, absolutely, Michael. Why don't you answer that one? Because on this slide, you can see we've talked about this almost in like layers. So Cloudian's giving you the storage layer, the consistency, the locking, and all of that side of things. From a Veeam perspective, you've got tools that sit above that, and you briefly talked about them, Michael, but we're actually naming some of them on the screen here.
Yeah. So exactly that. Like we've mentioned all the way through this, is that these people that are writing the code that attack your data, your systems, are getting smarter. They're thinking of creative ways of being able to actually make money ultimately out of insecure or not suboptimal processes. And so from a Veeam point of view, they're absolutely attacking or trying to attack our all backup files. So we, within our product, we're the data management layer, we can leverage the S3 object lock API that Cloudian exposed, and we can push that data to there. But there's also, where do we store that data for that really fast recovery? We have our scale out backup repository, which is our software defined backup storage, if you will. Really just bring your own storage, and we can leverage that as an extent to our backup tiers. The important thing there as well is that we're agnostic to where that storage or what that storage should be. So we could leverage things like XFS, ZFS, with basically anything. Bring your own file system at that point, and then you can start to leverage built-in operating or file system tools and snapshots, etc., to be able to prevent that first port and being able to recover that or protect that backup data within there as well. Things like instant recovery, the verified recoverability that I mentioned, the secure restore, they're also things that allow us not to just be that backup, ticking a box and just saying that you've moved some data from A to B is obviously one part of data management. Being able to do that efficiently and fast, that's the next challenge. But being able to recover those workloads when something bad happens is probably the most important part of any data management, because you only ever need backup and recovery when you need to recover. Like, backup is generally the last thing that on anyone's list, unless you've been burnt before by some sort of failure scenario. Then backup is probably at the top of your list, because you know how important that is when it comes to being able to recover that data. But so the way in which, so from a recovery point of view, how do we recover basically what you want when you need it, rather than bringing back everything? Like, there's a lot to be said to, if you only need an individual file out of a NAS backup, only having to bring back that one file from object storage, whether that be from on-premises with Cloudian or whether it be in the public cloud, there's obviously costs that are associated to that as well. So being able to be very granular in what you bring back and what you recover is very important to that. And speed, again, is how fast can we bring that data back? That's another key area that we're obviously focused on.
Yeah. Okay. I apologize that we're pretty much out of time here. Guy, I know you talked about some of the platforms and the features a moment ago. What I've left you is, unfortunately, a very short amount of time really to summarize, things from your perspective. But why don't you just take a couple of seconds and just talk about some of the products we may not have already discussed?
Yeah, I mean, you've heard about the essential ones here. We're talking about, running across multiple clouds with Cloud Director platform. We're talking about securing those workloads across multiple clouds with NSX and security solutions like Secure State to give you that hybrid cloud control plane, and things like App Defense as well to feed you information from multiple environments about how your applications are behaving. And really, all of this is central to action now, or central, reading what's on screen, central to the kind of the evolution now is the focus on Tanzu, which is our kind of development ecosystem of products that helps with from build to run to manage new application types and ensuring security all the way through.
Brilliant. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. We could probably have continued that discussion for another couple of hours quite easily, I think, between the four of us, without, well, not me talking that much, but the three of you. Obviously, if anybody wants to go and follow up on this, there's Cloudian.com, there's Veeam.com, VMware.com. There are plenty of resources on the website, and obviously we've had resources here on screen at the same time, so you can look at those. But finally, I just want to thank Michael, Guy, Neil for taking the time, and obviously for everybody who's in the audience today. And that is the end of our webinar, the beginning and the end of ransomware. So from the three of you, thank you very much. If you want to reach out, you can find more at info@cloudian.com if you want to email. But obviously just check out the websites and check out the attachments that are in the chat box below. If there are any questions that we didn't get to answer, then obviously we'll follow those up afterwards in a separate email. But for everybody listening and watching, thank you very much for your time.